Responsible and Equitable Use of AI Code Generators in Computer Science Education, a dissertation presented to the faculty of the School of Engineering and Applied Science, University of Virginia, in partial fulfillment of the requirements for the degree Doctor of Philosophy in Systems and Information Engineering, by Nicholas Gardella, May 2026. This dissertation has been read and approved by the examining committee. Advisor Sarah Riggs. Committee members Matthew Bolton, Raymond Pettit, Tariq Iqbal, Songkook Hao. Accepted for the School of Engineering and Applied Science, Jennifer L. West. Dedication. For Constance R. English, William T. Shearer, and Zola. Acknowledgements. I'm forever grateful for the many who have made this work possible. To my advisor, Sarah Riggs, thank you for betting on my success time and again. I threw more than a few curveballs at you, but you kept me consistently on track while offering unparalleled freedom and trust. Your voice in my head will always remind me to articulate the practical importance of my research and, of course, change the word since to given. Through a hectic 5 years, you somehow effortlessly got me exactly where you promised. You always stand up for your people, and I'm glad to be one of them. To my committee members, thank you for being the best advocates I could have hoped for. Tariq Iqbal, you helped me challenge my own ideas and offered connectedness in the classroom. Songkook Hao, your enthusiasm and encouragement helped me take on some of the most challenging of my research accomplishments. Matthew Bolton, your skeptical spirit and paradoxically obsessive yet relaxed demeanor has helped me conquer some of my imposter syndrome. Raymond Pettit, you have been a top role model for me. You were an indispensable part of my career development. To my other collaborators, Joseph Shelton, Isabella Grossel, James Prather, Paul Denny, Juho Leinonen, Ellis Barnes, and Claire Wood, thank you for believing in my work and helping me to grow as a scholar. I owe special thanks to Joseph Shelton as a mentor and to Isabella Grossel and James Prather for building relationships with me out of cold emails. Thank you also to Kylie Gomes for allowing me to participate in her work. This dissertation would not have been possible without 5 long years of fellowship support from the University of Virginia and the National Science Foundation. Thank you to the many faculty members at the University of Virginia and Virginia State University who enabled my work. Brianna Morrison, Mark Florian, Rich Nguyen, Xinyao Yi, Brittany Davis, Enoch Solomon, Irene Serrano, and Ahmed Mohammed. Many others are named for their support throughout the acknowledgments of the preceding chapters. The LaTeX compiler will not allow me to list every friend who's been there for me throughout this journey. To my lab mates, especially Lauren Horde, it has been a pleasure to have you as friends and colleagues. To my other peers, especially Michael Birch and Nora Shear, I will never forget your kindness and camaraderie. To those who went before, especially Haley Green and Lahiru Nuwan Wijayasinghe, you inspired me to push through this work even when I doubted myself. To those not named, you know who you are, and I'm deeply grateful for your friendship. Thank you finally to my family. To my parents, Robert and Lynn, you've exemplified lifelong learning and positive impact in the world. Through every kind of schooling imaginable, you gave me everything I needed to succeed, as well as sewing skills and the inability to sit still. To my grandparents, Patricia and Robert, your love, prayers, and hard work laid the groundwork for this legacy. To my siblings, Raymond and Rebecca, thank you for setting strong examples and pushing me down the stairs in a laundry basket. Last but certainly not least, thank you to my spouse, Claire. Our life together is the greatest accomplishment of these past 5 years. You are my biggest supporter and my best friend. Abstract. Generative Artificial Intelligence, AI, is highly effective for software development tasks. GitHub Copilot and other such AI-driven development environments, AIDEs, are widely available for students and professional programmers alike. Institutions need to react swiftly to this technology by implementing evidence-based updates to policies and curricula in computer science, CS, education. While research in this area is on the rise, there's limited empirical work that systematically compares individual, AI-assisted, and human-human pair programming paradigms with respect to both well-being and performance over time. Furthermore, despite many attempts to model human interactions with aids, there are several underexplored topics. These include reconciling the numerous and disparate qualitative interaction models, quantifying the relevance of trust to interactions with AIDEs, and exploring implications with respect to educational equity and political economics. This dissertation provides foundational understanding to foster inclusive student success by 1. Evaluating and explaining novice-aide interactions in terms of performance, well-being, subjective experience, and trust. 2. Situating novices' experiences with aides against the societal backdrops of racial exclusion and capitalist economics in education. 3. Comparing AI assistance to a social pair programming alternative. And 4. Synthesizing the findings of the prior 3 steps into a list of evidence-informed recommendations for educational use of code-generating AI. Chapter 1. Introduction. 1.1. Problem Area. This work investigates human-AI interaction in the programming domain to inform computing pedagogy. Modern transformer-based large language models, LLMs, have enabled the proliferation of artificial intelligence AI code generation tools such as OpenAI Codex, Google AlphaCode, Amazon CodeWhisperer, and Salesforce CodeGen. These technologies stand to change the role of humans in the future of software development. While computing occupations are expected to grow in coming years, the Bureau of Labor Statistics predicts that automation will reduce demand for traditional computer programming in favor of professions at higher levels of abstraction from code. This presents a critical need for computer science CS education that prepares students to work collaboratively with AI teammates in their careers. One of the most popular and accessible tools employing generative AI technology for programming is GitHub Copilot. Built on the OpenAI Codex model, this artificial intelligence-driven development environment, AID, was released publicly in June 2022 and has been coined as your AI pair programmer. Copilot can write multi-line, multilingual solutions, match context, write tests, create documentation, and explain code in natural language. At the time of writing, verified students of at least 13 years of age can access Copilot for free through the GitHub Global Campus program. If Copilot can help students build skills, self-efficacy, and interest in computer science, it may be a valuable tool for improving equity in the field. Aides are highly capable in solving simple tasks that novices tend to encounter as they develop computer programming competencies. This raises concerns that students will overuse aides, fail to learn from educational programming assignments, and be unprepared for safety and privacy-critical programming domains. Leaders in education have been calling for policies to address these potential risks, as less than 10% of over 400 schools surveyed by UNESCO in 2023 reported having official AI policies. A follow-up in 2025 saw that number nearly double to 19%, with another 42% of institutions actively working to develop policies. In addition to risks, policymakers will also need to consider the potential benefits of aides in education. CS education has been quickly growing to meet increasing demands for computing professionals. However, Black, Hispanic, and female workers continue to be underrepresented in computing. Poor representation and retention of these students in colleges and universities is largely to blame. Introductory Computer Science CS1 courses are notoriously daunting and challenging for students. Underrepresented students face additional systemic and social barriers to success in these courses. Difficulty and lack of real-world applicability of coursework are factors that drive students to leave CS. By allowing aides in CS1, coursework can become both easier and more engaging for students. Previous pedagogical attempts to make CS more approachable have been successful in improving self-efficacy as well as attracting female, Black, and non-major students. The goal of this dissertation is to evaluate aides in the hands of novice and intermediate programmers in light of educational, psychological, social, and economic factors. This will provide invaluable knowledge for educational policymakers and computer science educators about the impacts of this technology. Previous work has studied many aspects of code-generating AI and its implications in computing and computing education. Unfortunately, much of the knowledge base has relied on observational research and speculative reasoning over experimental human studies. This work aims to address this gap by creating evidence-informed, human-centered recommendations through a series of thoughtfully designed laboratory studies. By considering equity implications and well-being factors, the outcomes presented suggest how AI can be used and restricted to best support an inviting computing profession for students in the age of AI. 1.2 Scope. The human studies conducted for this dissertation entailed novice and intermediate level programmers writing Python code under time pressure in a laboratory setting. 2 cohorts of participants, n sub I equals 17, n sub j equals 10, programmed alone and with GitHub Copilot, and 1 cohort, n sub k equals 22, programmed in human-human teams as well. Beyond dedicated attention to the dynamics of the human-AI paradigm, a central emphasis was comparing the AI-assisted paradigm to traditional solo and human-human pair programming paradigms. Data consisted of repeated measures, quantitative data, and qualitative data from interviews and questionnaires. Quantitative measures were both objective, programming performance and AI compliance rates, and subjective, self-perceived performance, workload, i.e. mental, physical, temporal, performance, effort, and frustration, and emotional affect, i.e. valence and arousal. Performance, self-perceived performance, workload, and emotion were used to compare paradigms, while trust, compliance, and performance were used to study the AI-assisted paradigm specifically. Qualitative data also focused mainly on the AI-assisted paradigm, exploring the human experience of programming with AI, the educational and equity implications of this experience, and the entanglement of this experience with capitalist economic values. The overarching intention of these investigations was to contextualize and evaluate GitHub Copilot relative to past educational programming norms. Since the scope of this work was crafted for a clear relevance to computing pedagogy, it's important to defend the worthiness of this application area. Specifically, the next section defends why to entertain the adoption of code generators and why to preserve computing education nonetheless. 1.2.1 Why adopt code generators? Code generation, also known as program synthesis, is an extremely desirable capability for a computer system for two reasons. First, computer-generated code can be useful for its ability to solve domain-specific problems. Second, computer-generated code can produce better code generators. With these together, code generation technology can theoretically enable autoregressive value production systems that exponentially reduce the toil of humans over time. Programming language code has been built into applications for decades. In the case of information systems, software helps to keep and review such records as writing, audio, and imagery, though software is also at the heart of numerous disparate technologies: planes, pacemakers, utility services, surgical robots, indoor climate control, and farming equipment. In disciplines besides computing itself, code generation has plenty of worthwhile uses. Code generators themselves are built from code. Just as advancements for the C language were built using previous versions of the C language, code generators can improve themselves. Doing so may require human assistance, but the possibility remains. Further, the assistance of the human may become strictly less necessary as the iteration cycles repeat. It's foolish to ignore this optimistic perspective because, whether noble or greedy, attempts to chase it are inevitable. In a world where the practical limitations of the modern day are gone, an idyllic vision shows computers that satisfy any want or need that humans may demand without imparting any harm or disrupting any meaningful toiling we should still wish to do. 1.2.2 Why educate programmers anymore? A continued need to educate computer programmers may seem obvious, but it's unfair to leave this assumption unjustified. The preservation of computing education is motivated by 1. Temporary limitations of the technology, 2. Lag in human values behind technological advancements, and 3. Durable human values. All technology faces true limitations specific to the current time. AI code generators are not yet measurably effective enough to uphold software-driven industries without humans. Telephone operators were crucial skilled professionals for much of the 20th century, but once communications technologies advanced, there was objectively no longer a need for their services. Today's best code generators are fighting for scores above 50% on SWE-bench, a benchmark that tests the ability to comparably complete software engineering tasks done previously by humans in a real software project. Even once the best code generators surpass the best human developers, the infrastructure and energy requirements of AI-driven systems may bottleneck the autonomy of software production for many years. Technology has historically advanced exponentially after key innovations. What capabilities now fill a data center and a solar field might later be contained to a cubic meter. Whatever technical limitations of AI code generators one can propose, innovation has an answer for. There's also a delay in human values behind the advancement of technology that draws out the timeline for the phase-out of human programmers. In the simple case of electronic mail, email, today's oldest generations may largely favor the physical postal alternative, though society at large endorses the many clear advantages of the electronic option. Even as a disruptive technology can be justified as superior to an existing solution, humans may not feel ready to adopt it yet. Only with time can the social norms around the acceptability of new technology move toward aligning with any objective superiority. Since both the technical and social limitations of the current time will fade, to stop here would argue we need only educate programmers for now. Some human values, though, can remain steadfast over time, encouraging continued human involvement in software production despite an economic irrationality in doing so. There will come a time when code generators have surpassed human programmers and humanity has come to accept that truth. Yet, for the desire to keep humanity engaged with what can be termed critical and meaningful enterprises, humans will continue to be involved with software production. Critical enterprises are those like healthcare, agriculture, and water treatment, which are, at least seemingly, needed for life. Whether for a lack of, quote, trust in autonomous systems, or for deriving meaning in these life-giving pursuits, humans care to be a part of critical enterprises, going against the probable ability for autonomous systems to be more effective without human involvement. Meaningful enterprises are those which make being alive worthwhile. Dystopian imagery of Pixar's WALL-E showed humans who apparently have all needs met by droves of robots and holograms, but miss out on the joys of struggling to live and thrive in a natural environment. The production of art, as comedy, food, music, etc., could potentially be automated by automatically generated software. Setting aside how the art itself would compare to that manually produced, the act of creating the art is a meaningful pursuit for the artist. In the same way, building software is, today, an enterprise which is satisfying and fulfilling to many beyond its only for now lucrative position in the labor market. To recap, we should continue to educate computer scientists as we adopt AI code generators. First, humans will be needed to aid a practical transition toward automated software production and fill in many gaps in its abilities. Second, human values will encourage human involvement in software production during a social transition to accepting autonomous software production. Finally, human desires to engage in life-giving and meaningful pursuits will encourage continued involvement indefinitely. 1.3. Terminology. This dissertation studies GitHub Copilot, an AI-powered programming toolset that integrates into a programmer's code editor. Newer versions of Copilot have a chat-based interface, which is now integral to its feature set and offered as a standalone web application. Gen AI. Generative Artificial Intelligence, Gen AI, as a concept, encompasses various approaches to creating outputs that resemble or represent human intelligence in an inauthentic form. This typically happens by compressing insights from a large body of training data created by humans into a predictive model. This model can then be used repeatedly to produce useful related content based on novel inputs. LLM. In common parlance, Gen AI refers to transformer-based large language models, LLMs, and tools that rely on them to function. Modern Gen AI is not only language-based, but often multimodal, accepting and producing non-language data such as audio or imagery. However, LLMs are still typically used as interfaces to other types of models, since language is an effective way to communicate with the human user. IDE. Integrated Development Environments, IDEs, are code editors with additional programming-adjacent tools such as job shell terminals, testing interfaces, and file explorers. They typically center around the editing of text-based code files. A very popular free IDE is Visual Studio Code, VS Code, which has an ecosystem of extensions that go beyond the basic integrated functionality. For example, GitHub Copilot was first implemented as an extension to VS Code. Being developed by the same parent company, Microsoft, VS Code was also heavily modified to support Copilot's features, which are now largely first-party integrations in the editor that complement the extension-powered features. In fact, in 2026, invitations to use Copilot come activated with the IDE, requiring explicit deactivation to be hidden. AIDE. Artificial Intelligence-Driven Development Environment, AIDE, is a term dating back to at least 2022. See citations 35 and 123. According to Perrier and Sprint, quote, AIDEs are programming tools like code completion that generate suggested code snippets based on a description of what code should do, such as a comment or the start of a function definition. End quote. See citation 123. Copilot, paired with an IDE of choice such as VS Code or Eclipse, is a prime example of an aid. However, the rising importance of chat-based interfaces in aids mean that generic chatbots like Google Gemini and ChatGPT ought to be considered aids as well. given that programmers are heavily using them for software development tasks. Code generating AI. This term is used interchangeably with aid, as aids are typically designed to generate code for programmers rather than only providing explanations or debugging help. AI code generator. This term is also used interchangeably with aids. AI that does not generate code may still be helpful to software development and computing education, but unrestricted LLMs are typically capable of generating code by default. This means that many LLM-based Gen AI tools, such as ChatGPT, are AI code generators, even though they are not branded as only tools for programmers. 1.4 Related work. 1.4.1 Generative AI for programming applications. Researchers imagined communicating with computers through natural language for decades, but only more recently has technology advanced close to this vision. Following the introduction of transformer-based generative AI, Gen AI, to the programming domain around 2020, it gained massive research attention. A number of empirical studies investigated its uses in software development but did not include human participants. These studies provided valuable early insights but could only speculate regarding implications for human users. The seminal work by the creators of Codex model evaluated their GPT against a human-generated problem dataset called Human Eval, demonstrating a 30% correctness rate with a single attempt and a 70% correctness rate with repeated attempts. Later work replicated similar results using GitHub Copilot, the aid built on top of Codex. A slew of studies have evaluated AI code generation technology in terms of code complexity and multilingualism, computational complexity, code documentation, code security, vulnerability repair, code repairability, and bug repair. Several early studies focused specifically on applications in computing education, but did not include human participants. In these studies, AI-based tools produced code that earned grades of 65 to 95% on educational programming tasks, and scored around the 75th percentile in both CS1 and CS2 courses. 1.4.2 Pair programming. As soon as the utility of AI for programming became readily apparent, AI-assisted software development began to be understood as similar to traditional human-human pair programming. Featured notably in the popular extreme programming methodology, pair programming is a practice where one programmer, the driver, types out code while another, the navigator, generates ideas and critiques in real time. Beck and colleagues argue that this method is more efficient than having the developers split tasks, work in parallel, and integrate the products at the end. Pair programming has been validated in education settings for its benefits to student performance and persistence. However, logistical challenges and incompatibilities between partners reduce the effectiveness of this model. As such, AI-assisted programming is an attractive means to overcome these challenges. At the time this dissertation was undertaken, very limited work made efforts to compare human-human and human-AI programming paradigms. Even since, only a small number of studies have investigated this comparison either qualitatively or quantitatively. In general, they've found that AI teammates provide superior, low-stakes assistance and boost motivation, but lack social presence, smooth communication, and trustworthiness. Human-human AI teams feature positive aspects from both team paradigms, but AI may tend to dominate the team. 1.4.3 Human-AI Programming. Early Qualitative Studies. This section provides a chronology of the qualitative findings of 11 early papers focused on programmer-AI interaction. Some of the common high-level findings include aids are useful but also imperfect, prompting aids effectively is challenging, evaluating AI-generated code is a task left to users, and over-reliance on aids occurs despite users' moral stigmas against it. In 2021, IBM researchers performed a qualitative study focused on using neural machine translation to modernize legacy code bases, a messy and difficult process for software developers at the company. They found that objective evaluation of AI-generated code was the best way for users to build trust in the AI, and that it was useful enough for users to tolerate imperfect outputs. Though the participants did not necessarily care to know how the aid worked, this sometimes led them to have suboptimal mental models. In 2022, Vithingham et al. Performed an informal analysis of survey responses after participants programmed with and without the GitHub Copilot AIDE. They found that users preferred the aid to standard autocomplete because it saved them time and helped them with getting started on programming tasks even when its code was incorrect. Participants used Copilot in lieu of internet search and sometimes over-relied on it. The authors described 3 main challenges for users of Copilot: interpreting and accessing its code, debugging its code, and providing it high-quality prompts. Researchers at Google explored strategies and patterns for aid interaction through interviews and self-reported programming videos from employees. They found that while participants prompted the aid with natural language, some felt that it was unintuitive and that they needed a special prompting style to effectively communicate with the aid. Participants usually used bottom-up problem solving and responded to incorrect code by expanding, reducing, or rerunning their prompts. Jai Gopal et al. Studied CS2 students' interactions with 5 program synthesizers, including one aid, to explore design opportunities for making these tools more usable and learnable for novices. They found users prompted the aid through, quote, incidental specification, end quote, of their intentions through the text in their editors and spent time reading suggestions rather than blindly accepting them. They were not under time pressure. Challenges described included prompting, managing control over numerous features, and recognizing meaningful progress with the synthesizers. In 2023, researchers at IBM internally recruited 42 participants with interest in software engineering to use a chat-based aid. They found that the conversational design exceeded participants' expectations, leading them to enjoy and desire to use the aid. Participants requested entire solutions at once or decomposed tasks prior to requesting assistance on subtasks. The authors argue that participants' mental models positioned the aid primarily as a tool, but participants also implied intelligent, quote, mental capacities, end quote, to it. Barkey et al. Developed the theory of bimodal interaction with aids by conducting programming observations and semi-structured interviews with 20 participants using GitHub Copilot to add functionality to several provided codebases. In the first mode, acceleration, programmers maintain control in a flow where the aid helps them to carry out their plans rapidly. In the second mode, exploration, programmers give control to Copilot by using comments to make requests, but then engage carefully with the code it generates. Bird and colleagues evaluated GitHub Copilot through a case study with 5 expert programmers and a survey of several thousand users. The experts were willing to give up some control to gain programming efficiency, and the respondents reported feeling more productive as they accepted more recommendations from Copilot. The researchers found developers spent more time reviewing Copilot's code than writing code, but questioned whether this method would always be most efficient across varied development contexts. Scoccia et al. Performed a qualitative card sorting analysis about use of ChatGPT for code generation. The data were 100 social media comments on the popular developer forum Hacker News. They found that commenters had both positive and negative experiences, recognized the importance of effective prompt engineering, placed varying degrees of trust in AI outputs, and had differing opinions about whether AI would drastically impact the software development industry. In 2024, Prather et al. Studied novice interactions with and perceptions of the GitHub Copilot aid through observations and interviews. They found that novices had positive impressions of Copilot's utility, but were also concerned about over-relying on it. Additionally, the authors stressed the importance of 2 novel interaction patterns: participants spending considerable time, 1, shepherding the AI toward their coding goals, and 2, drifting between failed attempts to utilize AI-generated code. In a global survey of 410 participants with interest in 2 popular aids, Liang et al. Performed mixed methods analysis of users' reported motivations, strategies, and challenges using aids. They found that developers preferred fast and cursory interactions with aids to deeper ones and were discouraged from using them by poor quality outputs and difficulty exerting control in their interactions. In a qualitative follow-up to reference 72, Kazemadabar et al. Used interaction data of 33 young novice programmers to explore the properties of their interactions with a custom aid in a self-paced learning experience. They identified 4 levels of reliance on the aid, from full reliance to complete lack of reliance, and found several signs of over-reliance in their data. They also found that participants mostly prompted the aid with natural language and verified code by running it, testing it, or tinkering with it. Finally, Nam et al. Conducted a mixed method study to evaluate an information support approach that used generative AI to accept either prompts or promptless triggers. Participants programmed with the aid in a series of programming tasks requiring the use of uncommon external libraries. Much of the study's focus was on quantitative and process-based evaluation of how participants engaged with the peculiarities of the prototype. However, the researchers also reported impressions participants gave via surveys they took after the programming tasks. They found that the prototype's integration of coding context helped to speed up users' quote, information seeking, end quote, compared to internet search, but that effectively prompting the aid was challenging. Early quantitative studies. Prior to GitHub Copilot's release, Xu and colleagues exposed 31 participants of various abilities to an early form aid. While participants largely reported neutral or positive experiences, they did not show any significant improvements in task correctness or completion times. Similarly, in the first major human study of interactions with Copilot, 24 intermediate and advanced programmers overwhelmingly preferred Copilot to standard autocomplete, but did not demonstrate concrete performance gains. In another study, 21 students with up to 8 years of experience programmed with and without Copilot. Researchers concluded that the code written with Copilot was comparable in complexity to code written alone, though static code analysis showed a significantly higher Halstead difficulty, a measure of the difficulty of code for an author to write and readers to understand. Eye tracking metrics on 15 participants' data also showed significantly shorter and fewer code token fixations when using Copilot. Kazemadabar et al. Ran one of the first studies of novice programmers that focused specifically on performance or learning outcomes for students using AI code generation. In this study, 69 novices between the ages of 10 and 17 learned to program either with or without a custom codex-based aid. The students who learned with Codex performed significantly better on their practice assignments, and there was no evidence of reduced learning retention on summative exams, on which they worked unassisted. The AI-assisted students who performed best on their entrance exam also showed significant improvements in learning based on the summative exams, indicating that aids can potentially provide learning benefits to more advanced learners. 1.4.4 Gen AI in Computing Education. Educators have begun using Gen AI within the classroom, but research is mixed regarding its benefits and harms to students. Two primary approaches are developing tools with guardrails meant only for use in education and studying the effects of commodity tools in education to better understand how to best introduce them pedagogically. The latter is closer to the perspective of this dissertation, but both warrant dedicated attention. Tools with guardrails. Overview. For years, conversational learning assistants have been developed for education and computing education specifically. Recent leaps in AI reliability and popularity enabled much more capable tooling that has lasted beyond the concept or prototype phase. This section focuses on a few strong cases: Code Help, Code Aid, Learn Aid, and CS50 Duck. Note that other tools exist but are not easily accessible for use beyond the creator's home institutions. For example, Code Tailor, which uses AI to generate custom Parsons problems for CS students, does not appear to be shared on GitHub or a public website. Code Help. Code Help is an, quote, automated teaching assistant for coding and computer science, end quote. The design evaluates the basic prompt response pattern by focusing on structure and reduction of ambiguity. As an alternative for common help requests to human teaching assistants, the prompt asks for 3 inputs from the student: a code snippet, an error message, and additional detail about the question or issue. When the tool detects that the user has underspecified their request, it will ask for clarification before answering. Finally, Learning Tools Interoperability (LTI) support and an administrative dashboard view allow instructors to link their courses to Code Help and monitor their students' AI interactions. Code Help also uses a bring your own AI strategy, so users can make use of the app and its educational customizations while paying for their own computing resources. Code Aid. In relation to their quantitative and qualitative research in this area, Kazemadabar and colleagues developed two similar products, the programming assistant Code Aid and the startup company Learn Aid. These bespoke learning platforms, made with students as intended users, add guardrails, customized web interfaces, and curricular specificity to commodity LLMs. Code Aid has 6 core text-based features to let students ask general or contextual coding questions, learn more about snippets of code, debug snippets of code, and get pseudocode instructions for writing new code. Importantly, Code Aid uses few-shot learning to encourage the base LLM not to provide direct code suggestions for users. All this means is that the developers insert additional text prompting alongside the user's prompt to instruct the model at inference time how it should behave. The weights and biases of the model itself remain unchanged. One consequence of this was that students who used Code Aid also used ChatGPT when they wanted to overcome these guardrails, aligning with the fears of interviewed instructors. Learn Aid. Learn Aid is an academic spin-off startup company that provides a web-based AI learning platform for educational institutions. At the time of writing, the company only appears to serve the University of Toronto, the creator's home institution. In early 2026, publicized features include a learning module, a practice module, and an assignment module, all of which vaguely resemble an AI chat interface or document-based AI service like Notebook LM. Learning mode gives customized text-based instruction with interactive examples that can show, for example, code tracing timelines in relation to the content. Practice mode can generate questions based on the course content for students to test their knowledge and get customized feedback based on their answers. Assignment mode allows students to upload their code solutions and get help with debugging, understanding, and improvement. These two tools, Code Aid and Learn Aid, represent some of the earliest attempts to translate the concept of an AI tutor into a developed learning platform. CS50 Duck. Harvard's collection of CS50 courses serves hundreds of university students and millions of online learners by teaching introductory topics. Their CS50 Duck chatbot is freely available online and provides rate-limited chat oriented toward learning to code. As a cost-saving and spam-preventing measure, the Duck has a health meter of 10 requests that renew by 1 request every few minutes. It also refuses to generate code and rejects malicious prompting behaviors designed to thwart its guardrails. Summary. The commonality of these tools is that they all attempt to reinvent Gen AI tooling to cut out potentially harmful aspects. Namely, the code generation capabilities of the underlying LLMs are severely limited, but the explanation and scaffolding aspects are amplified. By preventing students from using these tools to do their assignments directly or ask excessive and repeated questions, they encourage more moderate and productive interactions. A major limitation is that students who wish to overcome guardrails can easily seek commodity tools like ChatGPT and Copilot instead. As a result, other researchers have tried to embrace the full capabilities of Gen AI for learning. For example, Denny et al. Developed a tool called Promptly, which serves a new type of programming problem called a, quote, prompt problem, end quote. Here, instead of trying to write code manually, students are not only encouraged to prompt AI for code, they're forced to do so as they're prevented from writing or editing code manually. This is meant to teach them how to effectively communicate their goals, a much more relevant skill for a future where AI exceeds humans' programming abilities. Along the same lines, Porter and Zingaro released an introductory programming textbook that has students use GitHub Copilot and ChatGPT from the very beginning. This textbook has been used in real course offerings, and students perform in line with instructional norms, even when exams contain AI disallowed questions. Other more gentle introductions have been suggested to introduce students to AI without centering the course around it. These examples stress the importance of continuing to study off-the-shelf aids in educational contexts, as banning them may be at least unnecessary and at worst actively harmful. Effects of commodity tools. Importance. Around the first public release of ChatGPT, discussion and speculation in the research community about the pedagogical implications of Gen AI became voluble. Educators began adapting by, for example, increasing the weight of exams over programming assignments, teaching about AI ethics, and thinking about how to use AI to offload instructional labor. Some major concerns include lack of consistency among instructors' policies, unclear expectations for students about the extent to which AI usage is acceptable, new effort for instructors to adapt their courses, and keeping up with rapid advancement of the technology. Opportunities include more accessible assistance for students and more creative and innovative educational activities. Though the approaches discussed above are an important part of realizing AI's educational potential, study of commodity tools in the wild is another critical component. The reality is that students will mostly use tools they can access for free or via institutional subscriptions, rather than bespoke options like code help. Metacognitive support. As mentioned in section 1.4.3, considerable early research has explored human-AI interaction in the programming domain, even with some special attention to novices. Here, the focus is more narrowly on the effects of AI within computing education settings. In a 2022 study of OpenAI's Codex model, which was used to power GitHub Copilot in the early days, 21 university students worked on an assignment to translate natural language to JavaScript code. The students reacted to the AI outputs as either correct or incorrect, despite that the AI was fairly inconsistent and non-deterministic. They also felt that they needed to invent a special syntax for prompting, in line with the findings of industry research and later work. They also found that though the AI was imperfect, interacting with it was helpful to stimulate exploration and further thought. The authors attribute this to the friction or conflict between the AI's perspective and that of the student, stemming from preconceived notions and prior knowledge. Their results and explanation align with the findings of reference 10 and are also similar to an idea proposed in reference 119 that prompting an AI provides a, quote, metacognitive scaffold, end quote, similar to the practice of, quote, rubber ducking, end quote. The practice entails instructing students to verbalize their thought processes and lines of questioning as if to an inanimate rubber duck. This is useful since students often, for example, discover the answer to their own question while asking a human teaching assistant for help with their work. The original version of Harvard's Duck Debugger was actually designed around this idea. Before the duck had an AI persona, it was simply a useless chatbot that responded to every prompt with quack or quack quack. As the roots suggest, metacognition is cognition about cognition, or an awareness, understanding, and control over a mentally demanding problem-solving process. When metacognition is lacking for a student programmer, they might be effectively solving an incorrectly chosen problem or solving a correctly chosen problem with little awareness of how far they are from completing it. Metacognitive difficulties. As much as AI can provide a scaffolding for metacognition, it can disrupt it just the same. Chauffin conducted a study with 56 CS students who took assessments with the help of ChatGPT prior to learning the relevant course material. The students were capable of arriving at correct answers with the AI's help, but were easily misled when they did not have a good grounding in the subject area. This partially supports the speculative fears that AI could harm students more than experts. On the other hand, a study of 54 students that measured self-regulated learning behaviors, i.e. metacognition, found no relationships at all with AI use. Even across different types of usage, i.e. accelerating code writing, solving one part of a problem, solving multiple parts of a problem, understanding a problem, or understanding code, there were no significant differences in self-regulation. Qualitative research still upholds risks to metacognition, suggesting that individual differences among students potentially account for inconclusive overall effects. Prather et al. Used a Think Aloud protocol to study the metacognitive behaviors of 21 CS1 students who programmed with the help of GitHub Copilot and ChatGPT. They found stronger students were accelerated by the AI and able to ignore it as needed to stay on track, while struggling students experienced a host of metacognitive difficulties and had an, quote, illusion of competence, end quote. Though seemingly in conflict with some findings in reference 94, this aligns with other findings therein. Margalou et al. Observed an association with AI use for struggling students. Those in their study who had low self-efficacy and course grades tended to use AI more often and earlier in the course compared to stronger students. Similarly, research about CS students' help-seeking behaviors finds that AI use is bimodal rather than unimodal. Some use AI very often while others use it very little, with a gap between. The idea that AI benefits strong students more than weaker students was also suggested by Reference 72 and by Scotia, who identified how prompting AI in English can be challenging for non-native speakers. Learning. There is not great evidence to conclude AI's overall effect on CS students' learning. AI-inclusive pedagogies have shown anecdotally positive receptions from students and instructors, yet deliberate studies certainly do not agree conclusively. Kazemdabar found no significant differences in learning between AI-assisted and an unassisted learning condition. Though instructive, such an inconclusive finding can often be misinterpreted as a finding of nil effect when it is really a failure to find an effect. Similarly, Shui et al. Concluded that ChatGPT does not present a threat to student learning based on lack of significant differences on closed-book post-tests. One study that did show a significant difference was actually a harm rather than a benefit, but their statistical method was fairly non-conservative, reporting a one-sided Spearman correlation with a p-value of 0.026 as the marker of statistical significance. Yilmaz and Yilmaz found benefits instead, showing students reporting higher subjective ratings of their computational thinking skills. This would certainly be the case if students were incorrect about their own competence based on the metacognitive conflation of their own work to that of their AI assistant. It's worth noting that the authors of Reference 164 advertised in the paper that they were, quote, willing to share their data, analytics methods, and study materials with other researchers upon request, end quote, but after over 8 months have not responded to such a request made via email in June 2025. Ultimately, multiple studies agree that individual differences in how and for what students choose to use AI assistance has a large bearing on learning, with complete outsourcing of coding and critical problem solving being problematic and explanations and moral support being productive. Self-efficacy. AI also has questionable effects on self-efficacy, a student's belief in their own future ability to succeed, which is generally associated with academic success. As foreshadowed in metacognitive difficulties, AI sometimes intrudes and confuses programmers, reducing perceived control, something programmers tend to like to maintain. AI also changes how programmers approach the programming process, reducing their autonomy over their actions. Like how programmers try to conform to a syntax they find to perform best, How et al. Reported one participant giving the same prompt to the AI multiple times, considering common aspects of the outputs more reliable. These types of heuristic adaptations provide a false sense of confidence and hinge on the true reliability of a single model. This takes away the programmer's autonomy, as they depend on the AI being correct for their approach to be successful. Research has also found that programmers blame themselves for AI's failures, raising concerns about harms to self-efficacy. Though Reference 164 found AI had a positive effect on self-efficacy and motivation, the findings of Reference 94 and 118 suggest that students' self-appraisals may have been misplaced and inappropriately overconfident. Even so, additional confidence could potentially be beneficial to academic success. 1.4.5 Well-being. Stepping back to AI's effects on programmers more broadly, it's very important to consider factors beyond human performance in the form of programming efficiency and academic achievement. As an engineering dissertation, this work draws from formal recommendations by the world's leading engineering professional society, the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, IEEE. For unfamiliar readers, IEEE has interests across many engineering disciplines, including those outside electrical engineering. The IEEE Standard 710-2020 was written to describe recommended approaches for assessing the harms and benefits of autonomous and intelligent systems on human well-being. The standard covers how to assess well-being using, quote, indicators across 12, quote, domains. Several of these domains are particularly relevant to research about AI and computing education: the domain of affect, the domain of psychological well-being, the domain of community, and the domain of work. Emotion and social connection. The domains of affect and community fall under the broad landscape of emotion. Affect refers straightforwardly to positive and negative feelings of various intensities. For example, calm, happy, bored, angry. Community, on the other hand, is indicated by sense of belonging, something that's often explored qualitatively and in conjunction with student identity. Yet, emotions can also have social and community-oriented object foci. One person can feel emotions in relation to another person or group of people. Social connection is foundational to the learning theories of psychologist Lev Vygotsky, who argues that adults and more knowledgeable peers push individuals to advance during childhood development. Ultimately, some combination of the practical and emotional benefits results in the common observation that pair programming is mutually beneficial for its participants. In medical education, the stronger teammate may even gain an academic advantage from such, quote, near-peer teaching. Computing educators recognize the importance of emotional experiences to academic success, but only a handful of studies have evaluated code-generating AI using quantitative affective measures. Self-efficacy. IEEE 7010-2020 distinguishes psychological well-being from overall satisfaction with life and recommends it be measured by indicators about how worthwhile someone's life pursuits feel to them and how capable they feel at carrying them out. In the present context, psychological well-being is best indicated by measures of self-efficacy. Future-oriented, for example, reference 139, and self-perceived performance, past-oriented, for example, a self-grade. Based on the scope of the studies undertaken here, self-efficacy is unrealistic to measure repeatedly, as it tends to change slowly, over weeks, months, or years, whereas reflective self-grading can be easily performed on multiple laboratory experiences in a single day. Self-efficacy also bleeds into the domain of work, which can be indicated by environmental measures such as a sense of work autonomy. Self-efficacy is also somewhat affective in nature, relating to students' emotions as they undertake challenging coursework. As noted in self-efficacy, there's not a consensus about whether code-generating AI is overall good or bad for student self-efficacy. Workload. IEEE 7010-2020 discusses work in relation to the mental and physical demands placed on an individual to do activities like homemaking, volunteering, and paid jobs. Beyond autonomy noted above, the environmental workspace indicators suggested include quantity of working hours and sense of interest in one's work. Though not explicitly mentioned, workload would be another obviously useful indicator at the individual level. Workload, as discussed in the human factors literature, is the human cost of work, the toll that performing well on a task takes on the human. Workload is often considered in the human factors research because excessive workload can degrade performance, so interventions that reduce workload can support effective interactive technologies. A distinct but related concept, more popular in education psychology, is cognitive load. Workload measures such as the NASA Task Load Index, TLX, can be used to quantify cognitive load, but they also bridge beyond the cognitive. In addition to mental demand, effort, and temporal demand, TLX also covers self-perceived performance, physical demand, and frustration, an emotionally charged feeling of discouraging difficulty. Cognitive load is similar to workload in that excessive load, especially when it is from an extraneous or non-essential source, is undesirable. However, cognitive load theory, CLT, posits that in a learning context, there must be some load intrinsic to the learning task and some load germane to generalizing that task into reusable skills and knowledge. For this reason, too little load can actually be harmful, as it can remove a stimulus for learning. Another side effect of excessively easy work is boredom, a low-energy negative emotion. Though no established standard exists for optimal workload in learning contexts, research on motor learning supports that a moderate level is ideal. Research has found that educational programming tends to stimulate mental demand and effort most compared to other dimensions of the TLX. Other work has suggested that better learning may accompany lower effort and mental demand, though again, there could be some point of diminishing returns, below which lesser workload could instead be harmful. Very minimal research has explored the quantitative workload effects of aids. One study found that germane cognitive load was significantly higher with a bespoke educational AI tool compared to a human TA. Intrinsic and extraneous load were lower, but not significantly so. Otherwise, the workload effects of aids are largely unexplored. 1.4.6 Trust. In the human automation interaction literature, trust, the attitude toward depending on someone or something under conditions of uncertainty, is considered a useful target for optimizing human use of imperfect automation. Here, GitHub Copilot can be likened to other forms of automation, such as industrial control systems and airport security scanners. Copilot offers code suggestions with which programmers can comply, and now offers suggested code edits on which programmers can rely, in that they can choose not to make changes themselves when Copilot is not nudging them to do so. According to theory, a programmer's level of trust in Copilot should regulate how much they choose to depend on its help. Based on their level of dependence and the correctness of Copilot suggestions, this feeds into programming performance, which the programmer can observe to adjust their level of trust. Reliable software is pivotal for a wide variety of safety and privacy-critical domains, including medicine, aerospace technology, and military decision-making. Gen AI is not perfectly reliable, so the code it produces can introduce bugs and security vulnerabilities, with wide-reaching consequences. Therefore, the degree to which programmers rely on and comply with AI suggestions, i.e. dependence or automation use, greatly impacts the effectiveness of a human AI programming team. If a cycle of trust, compliance, and performance exists in the context of human AI programming teams, then educational interventions can target programmers' levels of trust to optimize the effectiveness using AI. A trust compliance performance cycle is relatively well supported by the human factors literature, but little research has studied it in the context of human AI programming teams. A prior study compared trust between groups of students and found that a younger cohort trusted aids more than an older one. Other researchers found that programmers who wrote more secure code were less trusting than less secure programmers. These findings align with the work discussed in section 1.4.4 about novices' overconfidence programming with aids. Research about trust's impacts on aid dependence supports the link qualitatively, but quantitative evidence is lacking. For example, participants have been observed accepting code of clearly low quality, yet in many cases, quote, over-reliance is labeled as such based on programmers' limited engagement with good quality code. This represents a point of contention between capitalistic industrial computer science and intellectual or educational computer science. The supposed over-reliance could actually be considered appropriate reliance by the definition of automation misuse as trusting automation in excess of its true capabilities. When one trusts highly in a highly reliable system, it's arguable whether this behavior is inappropriate. In a learning context, there may be a concern, but if one is learning about tasks they may always be able to offload to AI in their career, depending on AI may still be appropriate even when engagement is sacrificed. 1.4.7 Summary of Research Gaps. This section revisits the research gaps identified throughout sections 1.4.1 to 1.4.6 that this dissertation aims to address. The examples in section 1.4.4 show that AI has clear pedagogical promise in computing, but is not enough to study bespoke tools. It's critical to also evaluate and explain how novice programmers use off-the-shelf aids on performance-oriented programming tasks similar to the assessments students face in school. When this work was undertaken, much of the literature looked at the performance of aids without including human participants, excluding the all-important influence of human-AI interaction dynamics. The mixed findings of studies that did include humans left it unclear whether or not aids provided a definitive programming performance advantage, especially for novices doing performance-oriented, time-pressured tasks. See section 1.4.3. Even so, there's insufficient quantitative research about trust in aids to guide educational interventions seeking to balance performance and safety. See section 1.4.6. The well-being effects of aids are also understood as important to computing education, but quantitative research about them remains quite limited. As for qualitative work, many studies have explored human-aid interaction, but the literature is fragmented and biased toward advanced programmers and novelty-sensitive conditions. See early qualitative studies. Another major gap is the lack of evidence-informed societal critique about the introduction of aids to computing education. CS educators are calling for research into the equity implication of aids, but much of the existing work lacks grounding in relevant empirical data. There are also larger sociological discussions to be had about the economic systems that interplay with student perceptions of AI code generators. Though sociological discussions in CS education have critiqued power structures and explained systems of inequality, there's a lack of research using the lens of critical political economy, CPE, to unpack the economic entanglement of software industries with education pipelines. Finally, the exchangeability of aids with human programming partners is majorly unexplored. The idea that AI-assisted programming is comparable to pair programming is not a new idea, but empirical comparisons came much more recently. At the time this work was undertaken, research that evaluated AI as a substitute for a human partner was very limited. It's known that human-human pair programming is beneficial compared to solo programming for students, so it's very important to make an empirical comparison if AI is to be deployed like human assistants in educational settings. Though performance and affective measures have now been addressed by some work, none of these studies showed significant effects on learning retention. Measuring of learning differences to a known effective alternative is an unavoidable need for advising CS education policy. 1.5 Dissertation Overview. The overall goal of this dissertation is to provide foundations for responsible and equitable use of code-generating artificial intelligence in computing education. 3 arms of questioning are synthesized into a set of educational recommendations for a total of 4 aims. The remainder of this dissertation consists of 7 chapters organized within these 4 aims. Aim 1. Evaluate what perceptions, behaviors, and outcomes result for novice programmers when they use code-generating AI under time pressure. Chapters 2 to 4. Aim 2. Situate novice experiences with code-generating AI against equity implications and sociological critiques. Chapters 5 and 6. Aim 3. Interrogate the human-AI programming paradigm against the human-human alternative. Chapter 7. Aim 4. Synthesize a set of evidence-informed recommendations for the use of code-generating AI in computing education. Chapter 8. The following research questions summarizes the overall intent of this work. Overall research question: what does studying novice programmers in solo, AI-assisted, and human pair programming paradigms reveal about how computing pedagogy can best promote student success in the age of AI? The next sections detail the role of each aim and the individual chapters organized within. Figure 1.1 summarizes the 49 participants studied for this work. For clarity, Table 1.1 shows where the data from each cohort was used across the 4 aims. Cohorts I and J were conducted using a very similar methodology with an AI-assisted programming condition and a solo programming control condition, while Cohort K had an AI-assisted condition and a human-human pair programming condition as the control. 1.5.1 Aim 1. Evaluate and explain human-aid interaction. The first aim of this work is to evaluate aids for use by novice programmers and describe the qualitative experience and quantitative trust dynamics. Chapter 2 describes a study of Cohort I, see Figure 1.1, evaluating the performance, workload, emotion, and self-efficacy effects of GitHub Copilot compared to a solo programming control condition. Chapter 3 builds on this work by reconciling qualitative insights from the large but fragmented literature discussed in Section 1.4.3 with interviews taken from Cohort I. Chapter 4 draws on quantitative trust, compliance, and performance data collected from Cohorts I and J, see Figure 1.1, to evaluate the utility of trust as a target for educational interventions aiming to influence aid usage. Table 1.2 details the research questions explored across the 3 chapters of Aim 1. 1.5.2 Aim 2. Situate human-aid interaction in a societal context. The second aim of this work is to situate novices' experiences programming with GitHub Copilot against the societal backdrops of educational equity and political economy. This approach connects the narrower scope of Aim 1 to a broad social context that considers U.S. computing education in relation to the economic value systems and systems of identity-based exclusion. To consider racial exclusion, Chapter 5 details a qualitative case study of the historically black college or university HBCU students in Cohort J, focused on the nexus of personal identity, persistence in CS education, and the influence of code-generating AI. As for critical political economy, Chapter 6 describes the set of implicit capitalist economic values revealed by interviews with cohorts I and J, exploring their roots and implications for computing education. Table 1.3 lists the research questions explored by the two investigations under AIM 2. 1.5.3 AIM 3 Compare human aid interaction to a social alternative. The third aim of this work builds on the findings from AIMs 1 and 2 by comparing the assistance of GitHub Copilot to a human-human pair programming, giving special attention to learning and emotion. Due to the educational hazards of aids, it's not enough to compare them to solo programming. Rather, they must be compared directly to pair programming, which is a relatively safe and effective alternative. The findings from AIMs 1 and 2 alluded to a lack of social connection between novices and AI programming assistants. Chapter 7 further investigated this issue using a second study design and data from cohort K. See Figure 1.1. Table 1.4 lists the research questions explored for AIM 3, Chapter 7. 1.5.4 AIM 4 Synthesize findings into computing education recommendations. Finally, the conclusion, Chapter 8, synthesizes all the findings and recommendations from AIMs 1, 2, and 3 into a cohesive set of evidence-informed guidelines for using aids like GitHub Copilot in computing education. This discussion refers back to the individual evidence provided in Chapters 2 to 7 and describes how educators can leverage this foundational work to promote the well-being, academic success, and professional integrity of their students. This aim ties back the 6 investigations of the earlier chapters to the overall intent of this dissertation reiterated below. Overall research question: what does studying novice programmers in solo, AI-assisted, and human pair programming paradigms reveal about how computing pedagogy can best support student success in the age of AI? Summary: the next 7 chapters build toward educational recommendations for using aids in CS education, AIM 4. AIM 1 begins by evaluating and explaining human aid interaction. AIM 2 situates human AIDE interaction within a broader sociological context. AIM 3 compares aid assistance to human-human pair programming. AIM 4 concludes with evidence-informed implementation guidelines. The next chapter is the first investigation under AIM 1, providing an initial evaluation of GitHub Copilot for use by novice programmers.